It's the genealogy of Joseph. This is really important. So if you skip down to Matthew chapter 1, at the very end of the genealogy, it says that Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ, Christos, the anointed one, the Messiah, right? And what we often miss there is that the genealogy is not only telling us that Jesus belonged to the line of David, it's telling us that Joseph was part of the royal family. Now, why does that matter? I think it matters because most of us, when we think of Joseph, how do we think of him? Right? He's a quiet, simple, humble, lowly carpenter, right? We tend to think of Joseph almost as a kind of a nobody, right? And in one sense, that's true. In the eyes of the world, he was just a lowly, humble carpenter living in Nazareth. But in reality, as the first chapter of the New Testament makes clear, according to the laws of ancient Jewish genealogies, Joseph isn't just a carpenter. He is the heir to the throne of David. So when Luke says that Joseph wasn't just of the lineage of David, it wasn't just that his line went back to David somehow, but that he was of the house of David, he's telling you that he is the heir to the throne. In other words, Joseph wasn't just a carpenter, Joseph was royalty. And so these Gentile magi come and say, hey, where's the guy who's been born king of the Jews? And Herod pretends to be interested, but he would have recognized this is a total political threat to his power. So Joseph, as the rightful heir, is also in danger whenever he's in the shadow of Herod the Great.
And Herod the Great was not a good man. In fact, he was a very, very bad man.
So when Joseph is in Bethlehem, he knows that the one who is being born to him, the child being born to him as Messiah, is a threat to the guy down the street sitting on the throne in Jerusalem. So the whole scene, it's very dramatic. We often think of like the infancy narratives as the battle between, so to speak, Jesus, the true king, and Herod, the wicked king, and that's true, but actually Jesus is still just a baby. The real battle here is between Herod, the fake king of the Jews, and Joseph, the true king of the Jews, who's got to safeguard and protect the heir to the throne, the Messiah.
Can you imagine how humble Joseph must have been? He is the hidden king. He's had his throne usurped by an absolute jerk, right? Someone who's trying to kill him and his offspring, even though he is the rightful king. And he's dealing with all this in humility.
Joseph is a model of silence and humility, but he's not a model of inaction, right? I mean, he acts, but he does so quietly and with humility. He has to go down to Egypt and live in a pagan country, right? As an exile and a refugee until that wicked man dies. Now, go to Matthew 2:22. What happens? It says that when Herod died, Joseph heard that Archelaus reigned over Judea in place of his father Herod, and so he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. This is really important, Matt. So what Matthew's telling us is Joseph's waiting it out. He's waiting for the fake king of the Jews, Herod, to die. But one of the last things Herod did before he died, Josephus tells us, is he was going to make one of his other sons, who was a more virtuous man, king, but he changes his mind and he makes Archelaus, who is his most wicked son, to be his heir. And Joseph knows this. He knows the politics of the day. And as soon as he learns that the wicked son of Herod, Archelaus, is going to be reigning in Judea, he realizes it's too dangerous for me to take Mary and Jesus back to Bethlehem. It's too dangerous for me to take them back to Judea. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go up north. I'm going to go to Galilee. And I'm going to live in this podunk little town, this nothing town of Nazareth that's never even mentioned in the Old Testament, right? And I'm going to live there as a poor, humble carpenter who can, as we see in the infancy narratives, can't afford to buy a lamb for a sacrifice. He has to give the sacrifice of the poor, the 2 turtle doves. But Joseph does it all without complaining. He doesn't say a word. He silently submits to the humiliation, not just of not having his throne, but as living as a poor carpenter up in the north. So to be safe, he retreats to this little rural town up in the north, far away from Jerusalem and from Herod's son Archelaus. Why? Not because he doesn't deserve to live in Jerusalem and be on the throne. Joseph does. He's the rightful heir. But to protect his wife and to protect his child.
Joseph giving up, so to speak, this claim to the earthly throne, right? So his kenosis, his self-emptying, is leading to a theosis, a deification, a divinization, a higher kingship in the kingdom of God. So he's giving up the earthly for the eternal, which is exactly what every one of us is called to do.
Called to do.
Right.
This goes back to Isaiah, that the shoot comes out of the stump of Jesse. So it's a stump. It looks like it's reached a dead end.
Right.
But as you know, if you've ever cut down a tree, if you leave the stump, what can happen? A shoot can spring out of that stump, and the whole tree can grow forth from it. And that's what's going to happen here in a miraculous way, right? With the virginal conception. It's going to look like everything stopped with Joseph, especially since he has no biological son, right? But he becomes the adoptive father of Jesus, which is a real fatherhood. And from that yes to being the adoptive father springs forth not just an earthly kingdom, but the heavenly kingdom of God. Joseph knew what it was like to live under a wicked king, under an illegitimate ruler, under in this case a king who has no respect for the lives of for life and for the life of the children. And that's a pattern we see in history. These kings who wipe out the innocent, right, to hang on to their earthly power. And that's precisely the kind of evil that Jesus is going to come to save humanity from. So this is there's a true sense in which Herod is a fulfillment of Pharaoh, without a doubt. And Jesus, as the new Moses, is going to set us free in order to lead us not to an earthly promised land, but to a heavenly promised land, in which there's not going to be any more crying or pain or slaughter anymore. Luke 2:21, at the end of 8 days, when he was circumcised, he was called Jesus. Now, the question is, if the Jewish custom of the father telling the name held, then who was it that called Jesus at his circumcision? Who was it that pronounced the name Jesus? Well, it's Joseph, right? So on the basis of Luke 21, the one word we can know that Joseph ever spoke is Jesus. And what does the name Jesus mean? In Hebrew, it means the Lord saves. So that's Joseph's message to us today, right? We will often hear people say, if you look at Mary in the gospel, she always points us to Jesus. Well, you know what? Same thing's true of Joseph. If you look at the one word that we know he spoke from Luke chapter 2, it's Jesus, the Lord saves. So he's Joseph pointing us away from him as well to the one who is the Lord and who will save us, right? It reveals his identity and his mission.
Yeah, and I think that bringing this out makes it so obvious that St. Joseph is not just a patron for men, right? Just as Our Lady we look to Our Lady and she guides us to Christ, Joseph is doing that for everyone in the family of God. And all of us should develop a deep devotion to St. Joseph. St. Teresa of Avila had a deep devotion to St. Joseph.
She said, I wish I could persuade everyone to be devoted to this glorious saint, right? I've never known anyone truly devoted to him who did not notably advance in virtue.
Bingo.
So if you want to grow in virtue, which I'm pretty sure is the name of the game, then go to St. Joseph, right? Because he's a model. He's a model.